a volunteer here at Boyer's Orchard in South Anchorage. It's a really unique little spot. It started out as a hobby for a gentleman when he retired. And he put in a giant greenhouse and an acre of fruit trees. And I just jumped in and started helping about 9 years ago. And I've been learning through practice and a lot of error how to do things and become really passionate about growing fruit trees. I would like to help other people to be able to grow fruit trees for the joy of it and also for the extra food, the food security, and just because I think it's a wonderful thing to do. So yeah, okay, sounds good. Hopefully some of you have the printout. Even if you don't have the printout, you'll still be able to kind of follow along, but afterwards you might want to get that because it's an outline of what we're going to go over today, the basics. I'm going to try not to do the fire hose thing and completely overwhelm you by organizing this into steps. And we will have some opportunities for answers, for questions and answers. We're going to try to do most of those at the end, but if there is something that's urgent right about the topic I'm discussing right at that moment that we need to discuss, we'll do that. We were hoping to do a pruning demonstration outside, but the weather is not cooperating with us. So we are actually inside this greenhouse. It's a unique greenhouse. It's about 2,500 square feet, and we have about 70 trees in here. Most of them are apples, but we also have some, brace yourself, we have apricots, peaches, plums, nectarine, and a quince. So really unique opportunity here. And we'll show you around because it's really exciting that our apricots are blooming, are starting to bloom. So it's so nice to be in here and kind of be ahead of the spring by about a month inside. So a lot of the things that we're going to talk about in here apply to outdoor trees anyway, and we're just a little more comfortable indoors. So I hope that would be all right with everybody. First of all, let's talk about the fact that a lot of people are nervous about their first time pruning a tree. They're worried that they're going to hurt the tree, damage it, destroy it. So my first point that I would like to make is that pruning fruit trees is not rocket science. I have been making errors on these trees for almost a dozen years, and I haven't lost any yet. Some of them might look a little funky, but they're for the most part, they're producing fruit. And apple trees I find to be really forgiving with the mistakes that we made. You might get less fruit, 1 year because of it, but the next year they bounce right back, and you are learning all the time. There's many, many resources online. Sometimes that can be confusing. Things in Alaska are on a different timetable, but as far as the principles of pruning, they're very similar. So the first step is I want you to just, when you're thinking about pruning, take a breath, relax. It's okay if you make mistakes. Maybe cutting the tree down at ground level will kill it, but it might actually not. So that's about the only mistake you can make that you might not be able to come back from. So I can't see anybody's response, and I can't even see you. So is everything sounding okay? Are you hearing me okay? Sinead?
Yep, sounding good.
Good. Okay, good.
And I'll let you know if you have any questions.
Yes, the other caveat is none of us in here are professional videographers or influencers or whatever you want to call it. So this is a very unprofessional endeavor. So first of all, I just want you to be reassured that it's okay to make mistakes. It's just good to practice and learn. That's how we do it. Second thing, I want to teach you about why we prune fruit trees. The fruit trees and I'm mostly talking about apple trees. Apple tree, a lot of it will cross over into other kinds of fruit trees like pears and cherries, but primarily we're talking about apple trees. The apple trees that we have growing are ones that have been cultivated over dozens, hundreds of years, and they have been cultivated to grow fast and grow hard and produce fruit. So they need to be pruned. They were grown to be pruned. They were made to be pruned. And they are not happy and they will not produce well if they are not pruned. So there are several purposes. The first one is to give each branch access to sunshine and fresh air. That sunshine is key. So apples will not ripen without some access to sunlight. If you have it, and you'll know that if you have an apple tree where one half of it doesn't face the sun and one half does, you'll notice the one that does, those apples will taste better, they look better. The ones away from the sun will not. So every branch, every apple needs to have access to some of that sunshine. So pruning will help with that. It also prevents diseases because of the air circulation that can flow in there. And it gives you less branches, but more fruit and healthier fruit. So the key is not to have a lot of branches. That's the whole purpose of pruning, is to cut back some of those extra branches and redirect the energy of the tree into growing fruit that's healthy and delicious. It also helps to manage the size of the tree. So I am challenged as far as my stature. I'm only 5'3", and I really don't want to be spending my harvest season climbing up and down a ladder all the time. I prefer to, a big part of the reason why we prune is to keep the trees manageable so that we can easily reach them and harvest the fruit. And also to be able to see what's going on at the top of the tree. Sometimes there's diseases or insects going on, and if I can't see it, I can't manage it. So managing the size is also really important. Managing the shape of the tree to withstand snow loads or other pressures. Here in Alaska, obviously managing the snow load is really crucial because you can really destroy the trees if you don't. They can take down big branches. We saw that the last couple of years, that heavy snow load that we had in the Anchorage area has taken out a lot of trees. So managing the shape, and then also just removing stuff that is not productive so that the tree, again, does not put the energy into the wrong thing. I want to explain to you a little bit about dormancy and why we prune. Actually, let's not get to that. Let's first talk about pruning tools. And I have a few over here on the table if you want to show those, Emily. Here, let me get this out of the way. The other thing also I want to point out is that everybody's going to prune a little differently. So if you have another expert pruner in here and they are looking at the same tree I am, we may have different ideas about which branches should go or which shouldn't. The other thing that people have differences of opinion on is what tools they like to use. Everybody's got their favorite or the ones that they don't like. And so here are probably the most essential tools are your hand pruners and your loppers. And if you're dealing with a tree that's really tall, there's also these extension. This is a pole lopper. We also have a pole pruner, and there's pole saws. A hand saw is also helpful for some of the thicker branches. There's two kinds of pruners, and I'm going to show. I'm sorry, my pruners are not very clean, but they are sharp. So this kind of pruner is called a bypass pruner. If you look, you can see that the two blades are passing each other as they cross. A lot of pruners or a lot of tree people will tell you that this is the preferred one. While I like it, I have small hands. So for me, sometimes managing that size, this one is a small version, but most of them are a little bit bigger. So it can be a challenge. So there's another one that I also like to use. This is called the anvil style, and you'll see that the blade stops. There's only one blade, and it stops at this flat metal surface. So it's just like an anvil. And you can have an anvil pruner in a hand size, or you can have them in a lopper size. And there's one more I forgot to grab. I'm going to grab it right here. This is called a ratchet pruner. And you don't see these very often. It is anvil size, so you see that it comes flat against the blade. But it has a special ratchet mechanism so that if I was cutting off a thicker branch, I could just do like one move and then open it and another move, and each time it'll cut deeper and deeper. And these are really great for small hands like mine that are, especially when you're trying to get branches that are more than, I don't know, a quarter inch in diameter. So these are some of the basic tools. You know, if you're really taking care of older, bigger trees, you're going to probably want power equipment, and there's power versions of all of these different tools. There's battery, or as you get into the pole saws, there's, you know, the gas powered ones. There's also, there's different versions of all of them. So today I'm mostly going to be working with the two hand pruners that I like. And I don't know, we'll see how much we do in the loppers. We had to flip things around because we're not working outside. So we're kind of in inventing as we go. And this greenhouse was well pruned. A few weeks ago, we had a volunteer pruning demonstration, and then afterwards, people stayed and helped to prune the trees in here. So most of them have been very well pruned. If you were in here a couple weeks ago, it looked very different. We had lots of branches growing way up into the top, and we have to do that every year in here. The trees in here are very, very vigorous. So, oh, the other thing about the tools, make sure they're sharp, make sure they're lubricated, and make sure they're sanitized if you're going to go from one tree to another, especially if you're going from one person's orchard to another, because you can carry fungal diseases and other things from one to the other. You can sanitize them just with a spray of alcohol or a cotton swab with some alcohol. Yeah.
What's your favorite way of keeping them sharp?
My favorite way of keeping them sharp, I have a very small sharpening tool that I got that's no bigger than a pen. And I just go over it just a few times. It's not rocket science. If you go online, you'll find all sorts of fancy tools and methods, but I like something that's convenient that I can do right in the field. And so I do have a very small sharpener. The important thing is that when you are looking at your tools, you're going to have a flat side and you're going to have a beveled side. And so you want to keep the angle of your sharpening tool in the same angle as the bevel. So usually that's going to be, well, I don't know, I'm not good at measuring amounts, but you just pay attention to the bevel. You just hold your sharpening tool in that same angle and just go back and forth a few times, and on the other side, back and forth a few times. And then if I have an anvil pruner, I'm also going to just clean this part out with the same sharpener, because it'll make a cleaner, happier cut that way. These kinds of saws I find are impossible to sharpen, but many of the companies you can buy a replacement handsaw blade. So, and if you really wanted to go pro, there's places that you can take your knives and pruners in for professional sharpening. It's really important to have them sharp. It makes a big difference. Otherwise, you're ripping up extra material that you don't need to. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, we've got one other question. What's your tool sanitizing routine?
I use just rubbing alcohol. So I have a spray bottle, a small spray bottle with just some rubbing alcohol, and I will spray them down, between trees. So I'm going to jump ahead about when to prune. And I'm going to share with you the analogy that helps me understand the difference between different seasons of pruning. Think of a tree as when it's in the wintertime, it is dormant, so it's hibernating. It's taken all of its resources into the core of the tree and down into the roots of the tree. The resources, the sugars and carbs and whatever it needs for living are not in the branches, and they're certainly not in the leaves because it does not have leaves at the moment. So all of those resources are tucked deep inside the tree and deep inside the roots while it's sleeping and while it's dormant. When we prune during the winter time, which is what we're doing now, we're pruning in late winter, early spring, before the tree has woken up. Ideally, this tree is already starting to wake up because it's got green buds. So ideally, we already pruned it, which we did before it started doing this. So we prune before the buds come out, because the tree when it wakes up, those resources are sent out throughout the tree, and it doesn't know any better that there isn't a branch there that was there before. So it can redirect the energy to the branches that are still around. And it has all the resources that it had before. We haven't reduced its resources for the most part. We've only redirected the resources. So pruning in wintertime is the main pruning that you want to do. You want to take off about 30% of the tree's branches each winter. You don't do it in early winter because there is a chance of you have an open cut that was recently cut and it sits there in the cold all winter, that freezing and thawing that might happen can damage the tree. It's what we call winter frost damage. So that's why we wait till the last part of winter to do it, right before the trees are ready to wake up. So we've taken away the extra branches that we don't need. We've taken away things that are diseased. We've taken away things that are damaged, and the tree can direct its energy where we want it to go. There is what we call a summer pruning. That is a much less invasive. We don't do a whole lot of it. That summer pruning, think about the tree has already got its resources distributed out throughout the branches, throughout the leaves, all over the tree. This is the time when we want to get the tree to slow down its growth. So I know that sounds funny. You want the tree, don't we want the tree to grow vigorous and great? For the most part, we do. But a tree that is overgrowing, it's going to produce a lot of these little shoots that we're going to talk about called water sprouts. And it's going to produce more mass than we need. So when we prune in the summertime, we're pruning to slow the tree down. So winter pruning is to actually redirect the tree's resources in the right direction. In the summer, we're actually taking away some of those resources because we're actually cutting out living branches that have all sorts of stuff flowing through them. And so we're just taking some of those away so the tree has less to deal with. And it helps to kind of slow the vigor down of the tree. And again, focus more on the fruits that are growing. So that analogy has always helped me to think about why we're pruning and when we're pruning. Those are the two different kinds. Summer pruning it's not 30%. Summer pruning is just a little bit, just what's needed. Maybe you have a branch that's suddenly growing in the direction of your path that you're walking, you can cut that back. Or if you have a lot of water sprouts that have suddenly shot up. In here, it's very vigorous, so we do summer pruning just to head off some of those water sprouts, or we won't see the light because it gets so thick and jungly in here. It doesn't seem like that now, but if you look back at some of our photos on our website, you'll see it gets pretty thick in here. So now we know why we do it, when we do it, and what tools that we use. I want to talk a little bit about tree shapes. This is where things are different here in Alaska. We have to think about the snow load that we're putting on the trees. So if I was to leave an apple tree completely alone, they have different forms that they take in general. But what will happen is that the leader, the central trunk of the tree, will just keep growing up and up and up and up every year. And it'll produce some side branches as it goes. But of course, there's all sorts of other elements that interfere with that. But if there's no other elements bothering the tree, it would just continue to grow up and up and up and up and up till it's 30, 40 feet high with side branches, and you're going to get something that looks a little bit like the Christmas tree. It's a little thinner. The branches might be a little shorter up top, longer in the bottom. That's because those branches in the bottom are reaching out to grab as much sun as they can from underneath the canopy. In theory, that's what would happen. The reason we don't want that is because it limits the amount of light that's getting down to the lower branches, because we have a tree that's too tall for us to deal with, and because we're going to have a bunch of branches that are crossing, shading, and crowded, and it's going to keep us from getting the apples that we need because they're not getting the sunlight, the air that they need. So that is called the central leader method. The problem is we don't have ones that are just central leader because we have been managing them in general.
We could do like a show.
Yeah, well, I can also draw on here too. Okay, we'll go outside too and share some things. It's all that keeps the snow's getting more and more. But another method that I've seen, and this is I don't see it here, but I see it in the lower 48 a lot, is the vase method. Or also it might be called the open vase or open center. And you'll have a tree, they're not tall, they're probably not much taller than 6 feet. And there's very little growing down in the bottom. And all the branches will be concentrated here, but there's no central leader. As soon as you get to about 4 feet, the branches are opening up in different directions. And you see this one big round looking head of branches. That is for, that's the old style of commercial orchards, because it was convenient for picking, allowed a lot of light and sun. What it doesn't do is it doesn't handle snow load very well. It's a really great way if there was a lot of snow that came down, because you have smaller, weaker branches coming out from the middle, the pressure of the snow can break them easily. So here in Alaska and in weather locations with a lot of snow, we do something that's kind of in between. It's called a modified central leader. So we do have a central leader that goes up through the center, but we cut it so it's not too tall. And when we cut it, it encourages some branching to the sides. And then we manage that branching. And that's where the pruning comes in. Because the tree, once you cut that central leader, it's just going to branch like crazy. And we don't want it to be too crowded. So we're going to work on managing that a little bit. So the modified central leader, I've heard it called different things, but primarily that's what I recommend here for snowy areas. Speaking of shapes though, this is in an ideal world, you know, that we're talking these beautiful shapes that you'll look up in a pruning book and it'll just look so perfect. It doesn't work that way. You have animals, birds that land on a branch and it breaks, animals that climb the tree and it breaks. You have wind damage, you have snow damage, you have kids damage, you have all sorts of moose, of course, that would like to prune your tree for you. They would love to prune your apple tree. So there's all sorts of different things that happen, and no tree is ever ideal. So when I'm walking around and showing you, you're going to look at that and you're going to say, well, that doesn't really fit what she's saying. None of them fit exactly what I'm saying. So we just have to work with what we've got. And as I'm pruning, I'll show you about that. Are there any questions about the shape of the trees that you might have? So the trees in here don't have to worry as much about snow loads. So we have, I would say, a kind of modified central leader to vase, you know, to the vase shape, somewhere in between that. So we're trying to keep the branches, we don't want a lot of branches down below. We don't want them way up high, but we don't care about snow load. So we just work with what we've got. And I'll be able to talk more about that. It's really hard for me not to be able to see people's side of the plane.
Show the branches.
Sure.
I had a question about your modified central leader.
Okay. Okay.
Do
I have a
you
question about the modified central leader. So go ahead.
do you just kind of anticipate the growth and terminate that central leader before it gets too tall, or once it gets about as tall as you want, then you would cut that central leader?
Exactly. So since I don't have new baby trees or what we call a whip, I'm going to use my board to show you on that one. So he was asking about how do we modify the leader so it will, like, where do we cut it? How do we cut it so that we get the right kind of branching? So when you first get a tree, a baby tree, we call it a whip because it's literally just like this. When we first plant it, here's the ground, and it's just one, maybe 2 or 3 feet tall. There might be like a little bubble here where it was grafted, and there might be just a couple little branches like this. And then you're going to have a terminal bud, which we'll talk more about here in a minute. So when we get that tree, we're going to grow it till it's about 2 or 3 feet tall. If it's not already, maybe you got it when it's only 12 inches. If you're coming to the grafting workshop that's coming up, root stocks are usually sold in the really small, 12 to 14 inches tall. So when you first plant that tree and you're ready to do the first pruning, what you're going to do is there's very small leaf buds that you're going to notice that are going to be like this. They're going to usually alternate. And you're going to take off the first few inches. You're going to get rid of this terminal bud and you're going to cut right above whichever branch you want to grow next, or whichever bud you want to grow next. And you can go down 6 inches, 8 inches. But the important thing is to look at the direction that the leaf buds are growing, because whatever bud is first below your cut is going to be the new leader. And this one, the next year, is going to grow like this. But what it's also going to do is it's also going to signal these guys to start growing out. Maybe 3 or 4 of them, maybe more, depending on the tree. So that's what it's going to look like after your first year of taking off. It's, you cut it right, and you'll notice in a lot of trees, you'll notice that it comes up and then all of a sudden it does this little turn, this little curve and goes up. So the next year when I'm pruning, I'm going to come back in and I'm going to say, well, maybe instead of growing it nice like this is a scaffold, where you have the different rows of branches. Maybe it grew 2 or 3 of them out of that same spot. And I'm going to say, well, I don't want these two competing for light and air. So you would cut that one right there. And you'd favor only 2 coming out of that same spot. So, so that's just one way to do it when it's early on. After a few years, and if you're working on a tree that's been there for a long time, it's a completely different story. You just have to look at it and think about what direction is this going and what direction do I want it to go, and try to manage it for that. Always remembering that wherever you make the cut, the buds right below that cut are going to be the first ones to grow. And they're going to go in the direction that they're facing on the branch. And they're going to go, so this, if I cut here, this one's going to go that way. So I wouldn't want to encourage this one to grow if there's my house right here, right up against the house, or if there's another tree right there, because that's not growing in the direction that I want. Or if there's, there happen to be another branch right under it, they're going to compete for the same space, the same air, and the same light. We don't want that. So that's when we would, you're out of here. So I hope that helps. I don't have any young whips to show you here, but that's how you start out anyway. That's the idea.
Yeah, that does help quite a bit. Thank you. Our trees are about 3 years old, and we have not done any pruning yet. So we're getting ready to figure out how we want to do that. So
Okay.
correct me if I'm wrong. So the main purpose of cutting that central leader early on is to encourage good, strong branch growth beneath it, and otherwise, will that leader just keep on going straight up, and you won't get very good branching?
Exactly. So he was just confirming that the reason we cut off that central leader early on is to encourage branching. Yes, that's exactly why. We want to encourage the branching, and then we're going to control that branching with other pruning. And otherwise, that central leader, just like we said, with the central leader type of tree, it's going to grow a little bit more like a Christmas shape, or maybe like some of our birch trees, that they just go straight up with the little branches on the side. We want a tree that has big, healthy branches coming out to the side. And so we start that early on. If you're walking into a tree that's been around for a long time, you can throw away that book and that diagram, and you're just going to have to look at it and figure out where you want things to grow. I just imagine it growing out into the space that's around that tree, and thinking, will it get light? Will it get sun? Will it get air? I also have to think about where my sun is coming from in the direction that it's coming from, to make sure that it's able to penetrate all the way through the tree into the other side. So not always hard, fast questions, but the general idea, it sounds like you've got correct. So, all right. I want to do a little close up to teach you about the different kinds of buds, if you don't mind. I don't know if you're doing a great job with the camera, Leif. I appreciate it. This is what happens when you show up at our orchard. You're going to get put to work. So I'm going to show you a branch here from this tree. This is an apple tree called a rubinet. And if you look at this part of the tree, you can see there's kind of like a little ring or a woody collar. Try to do that so you can see. I know it's hard with close up.
I think it's
okay.
I think it's
Yeah, there's a little ring. That's showing us where the growth started last year. Everything beyond that ring was last year's growth. All of this is last year's growth. Before that is previous year's growth. Yeah. Yep, there's that. Yep. Exactly. That woody collar. So you can see we've got some buds here that are, it's kind of hard to see. There's got a little bit of red, and they're in the shape of a very small triangle pointing towards the end of the branch. And they're tight against the branch. Those are leaf buds. Those are just going to turn into leaves, and they're not going to give us flowers, at least not this year. If we go towards the end of this branch, we see a really pretty bud that's starting to swell and green. That's going to give us a flower. But because it's at the end of a branch, we call it a terminal bud. The terminal bud has special hormone in it called auxin. That auxin is basically telling all the buds, or most of the buds behind it from the new growth, you're going to stay a leaf. You're not going to be a flower, and you're not going to be a branch for this year. You're going to just stay a leaf because your job is to photosynthesize and bring sugars and all of that we need to grow. If I were to cut off that terminal bud, that auxin is removed, and these will turn into branches because I've taken away that message through the hormones. And it's just like what you're talking about with pruning with the central leader. When you take that off, it's going to signal these other ones to grow, and they would turn into branches instead of leaves. If you go back farther on the tree, and this is very normal, that the New Year's growth is not going to bear fruit. It's a 2-year growth and older that's going to bear your fruit for you. So, and by the way, you might notice there's kind of a white fuzzy stuff on there. People sometimes think that their tree has a fungus growing on it. It's just the natural bloom that's protecting your tree. Your apples will also often have kind of a bloom that you rub off. In the stores, we rub off the wax, but in nature, it's kind of a waxy, kind of grayish, dusty looking, but it's just the natural bloom that's protecting the tree. And we have it on the branches, and some varieties get it a lot thicker. This one is not very thick, but some of them just look like they're hairy. So these buds right here, as you can see, they look very different than our leaf buds. These are fruit buds. Each one of those has the capacity to turn into a flower, and each flower will, when it's pollinated, will bear anywhere from 2 to 5, 6, 7 apple trees. So it's not one fruit to each flower, it's several fruit to each flower. And so later in the summer, it's important for us to thin that if we want to help the tree to manage its resources and give us better, healthier fruit. So just to review, we've got the New Year growth here with the terminal bud at the end. These are all leaf buds, unless I was to cut the terminal bud. And then these are all flower buds growing on what we call spurs. And you can see they're not close to the branch. They're sticking out because they need more light, more air. They want to attract pollinators. So if we look, I'm trying to find some good, okay, so here's one right here. Here's an example of what we call a water sprout. You can see it's this year's or last year's growth. Sorry. It's growing straight up. It doesn't even have a terminal bud at the end. There's no flower growing up there. Its purpose is just to grow leaves. It's not going to produce fruit for us. It may never produce fruit for us. It may continue to just grow straight up, and its whole purpose is just to make more leaves and make more green, I guess, is what, sometimes I have lots of words for this, but photosynthesis, there we go. So these water sprouts take away a lot of energy from the tree for something that we don't really need. If I wanted this branch to be a fruit-bearing branch, what I could do is I could tie this down, because branches that grow straight up usually will not produce fruit, or not very much fruit. But I could take, like, I don't know, just a flagging or string and tie it down so it's more of a 45-degree angle. And in a year or two, the branch will get the message that now it can start thinking about bearing fruit, and it will start producing more flowers. But for the most part, what we do with these is we cut them off. And I'm going to show you how we cut them off. Once again, if you look close to it, it looks like there's a little collar right at the beginning of where it started growing. I hope you guys can see that okay. It looks like a little woody collar, like you're wearing a turtleneck or a crew neck shirt. And when I cut that branch, I want to cut it just right up above that collar. I'm gonna cut it right there, snip it like that. So that helps to redirect the energy, what we would call wasted energy from this branch. If you're thinking of grafting, or if you want to graft with people, and that's apple trees 2.0. We're not going to get into grafting too much, but if that's something you're interested in, these are perfect for grafting. These little pencil-sized water sprouts, because they have a lot of carb in there, carbohydrates. They can grow very quickly, a lot of energy, so they're great for grafting. Eventually, they can turn into fruit-bearing branches. So 3-4 weeks ago, before we did our major pruning here in the greenhouse, we had water sprout. Every tree had a ton of these. Some of them still have a lot, and some of them were 3-4 feet tall. And they were going up to the ceiling, straight up, a bunch of them. So one of the things that we do is we cut back all these water sprouts, and this is all. A water sprout is just 1 year's growth. Even sometimes they can be 3 or 4 feet tall or long. And we'll come in the summer and cut those back also, because it's just, the tree's just wasting energy on something that's not going to produce fruit for us, and it's going to shade out, the tree or the fruit that's underneath it. So we try to cut those out and try to do it when they're fairly young. When they're really, small, or just a couple inches, you can even just pinch them off, and they'll come off at the correct spot. So heading cuts and thinning cuts. Yeah, I think we could do that in here too. We kind of covered it a little bit, but not directly. So the difference between a heading cut and a thinning cut. So remember when I said that I could cut the terminal bud off, and then that allows things to grow behind it. That's one kind of cut. The other one was where I just showed you with that water sprout, where I went all the way to the origin of the branch of where it came from. Those are the two different kinds of cuts that we might do. Let's see where we're at. Oh, okay. So we did go over some of those spurs and all that. Okay, so the heading cut.
Question, Yael.
Oh, sure.
So do you not need any of the water sprouts, or do you just get rid of most of them?
Well, if your tree is young, you might keep some of them. So they're asking, do we need any water sprouts, or do we take all of them out? If your tree is young, you might want to keep some of those and shape them. There's different ways of shaping them in order to help it to become a fruit-bearing tree. Once your trees are fairly mature, you're gonna cut most of those out. The only time you're gonna leave one is if maybe there's a branch that broke and you need that water sprout to fill in that gap. But for the most part, for a grown tree, you're gonna take most of those out. And it feels like you're being an apple tree murderer, but you have to remember that these trees were bred and cultivated to be pruned. They need that pruning. Any other questions? Okay. So heading cuts are where we cut somewhere along the branch, and it encourages growth of the other buds behind it. Thinning cuts, and that's primarily what you want to do in the winter pruning. Thinning cuts are where you go to the origin of the branch and you cut that off completely. Thinning cuts will not, if they're done correctly, will not cause a whole bunch of growth. If I was to, we talked about that collar, like that turtleneck collar. I need to cut right past that collar. If I cut out a little ways from that collar, there are some latent buds in there that are going to come out. And the following year, it's going to be like this. There's going to be all these tiny little branches coming out of that spot that I just cut. If you make that mistake, you just go back and you cut them all off. So you want to cut very close, but not completely flush to the tree. The reason we don't do it flush to the tree is the tree needs just a little bit of material. It'll start to kind of shrink and dry and cover over that cut spot. Which leads me, a lot of people think, do we need to put something on that cut end? Do we put sealing? There's lots of products out there that want you to, people want you to buy. No, you don't need to put anything on it. The tree does a lot better naturally healing itself than anything that we can put, because then we might be sealing in some kind of bacteria or virus that the tree might be able to just take care of itself. So when we make those cuts, we just leave them alone. So, let's go outside. Hey, the snow stopped, so I guess it's time
Be really helpful just to see your thought process.
on a specific tree. Okay, sounds good. Let's do it. I'm just gonna carry my loppers and I think that'll be all right. Yeah, you can show people the orchard a little bit.
Narrate why.
Sure. So yeah, this is our orchard out. So I told you about the trees that are growing in the greenhouse. The trees that are growing out of the greenhouse are, again, primarily apple trees, some crab apple trees, but we also have cherries, plums, and pears that are growing out there. This is a great one. This is a mess. This is a hot mess is what it is. So, okay. And I've already gone around it, so I know where the sinkholes are. I don't think no, I don't, but that's all right. I won't need the saw. But so this tree, we don't know what variety it is. This is one where we've lost the tag. And last year we had an issue with rabbits. So there's 3 levels of animals that would like to eat your tree. The highest level, we all know what those guys are. Those are your moose, or if you're in Southeast Alaska, the deer. They're the tall guys. The middle level is the rabbits, and the bottom level is the voles, or the mice, or sometimes porcupines. So they would all love to eat your tree. And so we have to protect them at different levels. We did not adequately protect our trees from rabbits because they've never been a real problem before. We have a 10-foot fence with barbed wire around this entire thing. Bob really wanted to make sure the moose stay out. So we don't have a moose problem in here, but there was enough gap in the fence in some places and enough snow along the fence line that some rabbits were able to get in here. And we got some really serious damage. And this tree is one of them. I wasn't sure that it was going to make it. It's had a little bit of damage also this winter too. You can see a broken branch there from the snow. But what you see in here are a whole bunch of water sprouts. You see how long and straight they are? They primarily want to grow straight up. They're crowding and shading each other out. And so my primary goal with this is to cut back on some of that and encourage more fruiting. We lost a lot of our fruiting branches, so we probably aren't going to get very much fruit from this tree the first year or two after that horrible rabbit catastrophe. But what I'm going to do is the first thing I want to do is I want to open up the center. Well, actually, the first thing I want to do is get rid of any diseased, dead, or deformed branches. So if I see something that looks diseased, I'm going to cut it out. If it's deformed, like for instance, that one over there that's growing or that got destroyed, I would cut that off. And let me see where I can do that. Oh, this is already off. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of it right there. So this is an older branch. I can already tell that it's dead. It's really dark right here. If you're not sure if something is dead or alive, take just a little scratch with your fingernail, and if it's brown, it's dead. Okay. Now look at this one right here. If I was to take a little scratch with my fingernail, see that bright green? So yeah. So just the tiniest surface scratch, and I can show these guys here by we're going to cut this off anyway. So you would just take your fingernails and just a little scratch, and it's bright green. That's a nice healthy branch. It's certainly getting the nutrients it needs underneath there. So that's an easy way to tell if it's dead or alive. But I can also just tell by looking at this, because you see these yellow dots. I'll take off so you guys can see here. You see those? That's just another really good indication that it's dead. I think it's fungal or something that's decided to grow on there. So I can tell that this branch is dead all the way back to here. And also because it's facing away from the sun, this is exactly facing north from where we are. I am going to get rid of this whole branch. I'm going to just cut it off right there. And my lopper should do that. You can't see a collar very well, but there is one. So I'm not doing flush against the tree, but I'm getting pretty close in there, like so. So you can see there is a little bit of a lip. It's nice and green. So that part of the branch was still living, but most of it was unuseful to us. It was growing in the wrong direction and it wasn't very healthy. You have to keep in mind that we're standing about, what, 2 to 3 feet above the bottom of the tree as Emily sinks farther and farther down. I would probably, I'm just looking, and I'm just going to think out loud as I'm looking at this tree. If I was coming to your yard, I would look around at this tree and I would start walking in circles and I would start talking out loud about what I think. I think I would take this entire bottom branch out right here, because this is also dead or close to being dead. This is dead. This is growing way out into our pathway, and it's not going to get a lot of light. This part would, you know, like we might get some apples that are growing way out on the limb here, but it's also at risk for snow load and breaking the following year. So I would probably go all the way to the back, and I would use a saw for that. We don't need to do it right now, but I just wanted to kind of give you an example. And I'm going to continue walking around the tree. I'm going to look for the leader. Is there a real good leader that you guys can tell on this? Yep, right here. If you look at my hand, that's the leader. It looks like there was another leader growing here before. It either broke off or it was pruned off. But this is the new leader. It's growing straight up. It's growing really thick. And so what I would do is, yeah, it looks like that might have been from the rabbits last year, because it's healed over. Or it could have been that branch that fell off. It might have come off from right there. But it's not serious enough to cause the tree to die. Now, if it was girdled, so if there was, most of the bark was removed all the way around, the tree would die, or that branch would die. That's why we have to protect against rodents. You think, oh, the rodents, they can't really hurt a tree. They're just going to munch on it. Well, if they munch all the way around a ring around the tree's nutrients and resources are on the exterior, just below the bark. So if they go all the way around, they basically cut the tree off from being able to do anything. So it's going to die. So if it's just a scratch on one side, usually we can deal with that. So the other thing I'm going to do, besides the dead and diseased branch, so here's another real deformed one right here. I'm going to take that one all the way back again. Cut it off right there. Anything that's growing straight down, anything that's growing straight up, often, if it's not the leader, I will take it out. And things that are growing into the middle. So this guy is competing to be the leader. We have a little competition going on here, but I prefer the other one because it looks stronger. So I'm going to take this guy out also. Not only is he trying to be the leader, but he's growing into the middle of the tree. So he's gone. Look at those water sprouts. That's just 1 year's growth. So it shows you that the roots of the tree are still really healthy. Here's another one that I would probably take out right here, because it's also growing into the center of the tree. So already we've opened up that tree quite a bit. And I would just keep going around. There's some other little water sprouts back here that are growing into the center, and I would take those out. I've got another branch here that kind of thinks it wants to be the leader. So I think I'd probably take this one out. I'm really aggressive with pruning, just because over the years that I've done this, I find the more aggressive I am, the better the outcome, you know. I'm also looking for branches that cross each other, that rub on each other. Or I'm thinking about, oh, when it's heavy with apples, what's going to happen to these branches? You know, they're going to weigh down. Like, look at this guy. That's going to be weighed down quite a bit. I do like this branch right here in the direction that it's growing in, and I want to keep that one. So I'm going to cut, this is what we call the heading cut, is I'm not going all the way back to the origin of the branch. I'm just going up above the branch that I want to keep, or the bud that I want to keep, and I'm going to cut it off right there. Ooh, these are not as sharp as they should be. You can see it a little bit. And it's going to encourage this branch to grow. And this was the one that I think I was demonstrating on. So I want to clean that up. And I'm going to pay attention to where I clean it up, because it's got some buds, some leaf buds here. I'm going to think about which direction do I want this branch to grow. If I cut it off above a bud that is right here, the branch is going to grow here. I think I'm going to cut it right above this bud right here, because we're going to have a branch that kind of grows out here. We'll manage it. We won't let it get full size. But at least if it's growing here, it's not going to interfere with like these branches or ones that are nearby. So yeah. Yeah. So I know this is a lot and it's not an exact science. But are there any questions specifically about what we've been doing that you don't understand or you'd like clarification on?
We've got another question in the chat from Jeff. He was asking about the cages he has. He says he has 2-foot tall cages around all of his trees for the voles. And he wants to know, at what point can a tree withstand their chewing? And the second question is there a favorable angle of branching that we want to look for?
Okay, yeah, so we've got a question about protection from the voles. He's got a cage, person's got a cage around the base of the tree, or around the tree to protect it from voles. It is really crucial to do that when they're young. As the tree gets older, it's less important, but I still protect them as long as I can. Careful, Emily. Okay, so she's demonstrating how we have some thicker metal hardware cloth around the base of that tree. I'm not worried about a tree that size getting destroyed by the voles. It's pretty thick bark at this point, but it's already on there, and I'm not going to take it off unless there's a really good reason to. The other reason we would want to protect it is also from weed whacking, from kids playing, from dogs scratching, all those other things. So there's no harm in leaving it on there. The only ones you don't want to leave on are the solid plastic ones that don't have any holes in them, because then it can't breathe. So if you have one of those, like they're spiral, they're solid plastic, you put them on in the fall, you take them off again in the spring so the tree can breathe. And the voles will leave them alone at that point. They just tunnel under the snow like in the late spring, and that's when they're eating on the trees. Once other things are fresh and green and growing, they don't really bother them anymore. So he was asking about that. And then the angle of the cutting, was that the question? The angle of cuts, the angles of the branches, that's right. So angles of the ideal angle is at about 45 degrees angle to protect from snow and to also encourage fruiting. The fruiting will not happen unless you're a crabapple. Let me just say, if you're a crabapple, you don't obey the rules, you just do whatever you want. But for regular cultivated trees, if they're growing straight up, they're not going to produce fruit. So you don't want it growing straight up. You don't want it growing straight down, because that's just, it's going to be shaded out and it's not going to produce much. If you have it completely horizontal, 180, it's going to get hurt by the snow. So the ideal angle is at about 45 degrees. So you want to keep but this is of course in an ideal world in a totally controlled environment, and life is not like that. It's going to be a little different. So, but in general, that's what you're going for. Any other questions? Everybody ready to come over here and help me prune these 300 trees that we need to prune? Bring your snowshoes. We will start doing that next week, actually. Well, we were supposed to start doing it next week. We might wait till we lose a little more snow. Yeah. While the ground is frozen, I'm not terribly concerned about it. And obviously this ground is going to be frozen for a little bit longer. But the other thing is that there's a good side to the snow, and that's with snowshoes, we're up above it, and I don't have to reach up as far for the pruning. Yeah, so there are some advantages to doing it when the snow is thick like this. So the problem is that when it is time to prune, because there's a lot of trees and it has to be done very quickly. And so sometimes, you know, I'll get started a little bit earlier if I can. But one of the things we like to do here is do a workshop about pruning and then invite people to come and help. I think that was the idea today, but I think I'm going to excuse you all from doing very much pruning. Although I don't mind if we walk around, if people want to ask, like, would you cut this branch or would you cut that one or would you leave it? So, yeah. Say goodbye and thank you. And I hope I didn't completely overwhelm you, and give it a try. It's a lot of fun. So, and follow our Facebook page or the Boyer's Orchard. We're alaskaorchard.org. We're a nonprofit 501c3. And our goal is to educate and also encourage people to grow fruit trees successfully. So follow us and we can teach you a few more things along the way and maybe learn from you as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.